Honen his life and teaching. Chapter 45 Part 2. Honen's disciples. 3. The superiority of the Jodo. When we say that the Jodo is superior to all other sects, and that the Nembutsu is superior to all other religious disciplines, we mean that it provides salvation for all classes of sentient beings. Of course, meditation upon the Absolute, heart longing for perfect knowledge, Bodhi, the reading and reciting of the Mahayana Sutras, the mystic practices of the Shingon, the meditation of the Tendai, and so on, all belong to the law of Buddhas, reveal their superiority, and tell us how to crow over the sea of birth and death. And yet on the other hand, they are quite beyond the capacity of people living in these latter degenerate times. After the 10,000 years of these latter evil days have passed, the average length of human life is to be shortened to 10 years, and many will degenerate so that they will be guilty of the 10 evil deeds and the 5 deadly sins, and yet the whole of them, old and young, male and female, all, without exception, are included within the scope of that original vow, and are given the assurance that they will be cared for and never forsaken, if they will but repeat the Nembutsu 10 times, or even once. This is why we insist that the Nembutsu quite outrivals all the other sects and disciplines. 4. Threefold mental preparation for Ojo. Now it is said that one repetition of the Nembutsu just at the hour of one's death is worth more than all the Nembutsu repetitions in a long life of 100 years. Is this because at that moment there is more karma efficacy in that one repetition than in all the others? No. The point is that a passage in the sutra says that the one who has that so-called threefold preparation of mind is sure of Ojo, and as the one earnest repetition at the last hour fulfills this condition, we say it is of greater value than all the repetitions one could make for 100 years without it. But repeated in this spirit at any time, it has the same value as if said in one's dying hour, for the passage explicitly says, assuredly. 5. Audible repetitions. There are some who keep repeating the Nembutsu audibly every day all the time, while others do it mentally as they tell their rosaries. Which is the right way? Whether the Nembutsu be repeated audibly or inaudibly, it has the same value as far as attaining Ojo is concerned, because in either case it is a calling upon the same Buddha's sacred name. Only it should be borne in mind that the original vow says, calling upon the sacred name, and so it ought to be audible. In the sutra we read, let him utter the name of the Buddha Amida without ceasing, until he has said it 10 times. And in Zendo's commentary we read, call upon his name at least 10 times. Now saying the Nembutsu in a so-called loud voice means loud enough to be heard by one's own ears, and care should be taken not to annoy other people by raising the voice too high. As a rule, it is enough if you have it in mind to say it audibly even though you do it in silence. 6. The proper attitude to other Buddhas and Sutras. If we keep in touch with other Buddhas than Amida and other sutras than the 3 sacred books of the Jodo, and seek help from them, will this form one of those so-called miscellaneous practices? It does not constitute the whole of the miscellaneous practices, but it is a practice that helpfully contributes to one's Ojo on condition that one relies upon Amida's original vow, and continues confident of Ojo. Zendo says, we should bring with us to the Pure Land not only our own good works and those of others, but also our delight therein. This sufficiently explains the point. 7. Due difference between lawbreakers and others. Is there any difference in the Ojo rank of those who keep the commandments and repeat the Nembutsu but a few times, and those who break them but say the Nembutsu very often? Honen replying pointed to the mats on which they were sitting and said, it is because the mat exists that we can say of them that they are either worn out or not. If there were no mats, how could they be worn out or otherwise? In like manner in these wicked days, we may say that the commandments are neither kept nor broken, for the priests themselves are such in name only, as Dengyo Daisher very clearly states in his Mappo Tumioki, record of the light in the latter days of the law. So there is nothing to be gained by discussing the question of the breaking or the keeping of the commandments. It is for just such common mortals as this, that the original vow itself was made in the first. Please, and so we cannot be too eager and diligent in our calling upon the sacred name. 8. Nembutsu and daily living. If we only put our trust in Amida's original vow, there is no doubt whatever about our future destiny. But what are we to do with the present world? Well, the thing to do is to make the Nembutsu practice the chief thing in life, and to lay aside everything that you think may interfere with it. If you cannot stay in one spot and do it, then do it when you are walking. If you cannot do it as a priest, then do it as a layman. If you cannot do it alone, then do it in company with others. If you cannot do it and at the same time provide yourself with food and clothing, then accept the help of others and go on doing it. Or if you cannot get others to help you, then look after yourself but keep on doing it. Your wife and children and domestics are for this very purpose, of helping you to practice it, and if they prove an obstacle, you ought not to have any. Friends and property are good, if they too prove helpful, but if they prove a hindrance they should be given up. In short, there is nothing that may not help us to Ojo, so long as it helps us to go on the even tenor of our way through life undisturbed. Men take the very best care of their bodies, and refuse to cast them off, even though they know they are destined to return to the three worlds of evil. How tenderly should we care for our bodies, and how earnestly should we practice the Nembutsu, when we know that our destiny is birth into the Pure Land. Anyone whose one object of desire is such a care of his body as to minister only to the enjoyment of the present life, and not rather to help him in his Nembutsu practice, is doing what belongs to the three evil states. Whereas, if one's object of desire is such a care of himself as promotes his blissful Ojo, he will find that the desire contribute to that end. 6. Zenshobo meter Ryukin. So with every doubt about the original vow dissipated, and with his mind firmly bent on attaining Ojo, Zenshobo was about to take his leave of Honen and turn his face homewards, when Honen gave him the following parting message. According to the Shudo doctrine, we must develop our intellectual faculties to the very highest, if we would get free from the fated transmigratory round, whereas the Jodo practices requires us to return to our native simplicity, in order to get birth into this blissful land. On his return to his native provinces, Tadami, Zenshobo, hid his virtues from the public gaze, and took up carpentering as a means of livelihood. Now Rishi Ryukawan was just on his way to his place of banishment, when he stopped at Kofu, in the region of Mitsuk, in this same province, and many of the leading people of the neighborhood came together to make his acquaintance. He asked them if a priest by the name of Zenshobo was living in a temple in their province called Renjeiji. They told him no such priest was there, but that a carpenter by the name of Zensho was. At this he was more than surprised and said he would send him a letter of inquiry. He at once wrote and sent a messenger off with it to Zensho, and as soon as the latter opened and read it, he started off at once to where the Rishi was. As he came into the yard, Ryukwin came out and grasped him by the hand, and led him inside. They were both soon in tears, as they talked over bygone days. This greatly astonished the gentleman of the place, who had always looked down on Zensho as quite beneath them. Then Ryukwin remarked that Honen had once said Zenshobo could never be satisfied with Ojo for himself alone, without helping others to attain it, and so it would be too bad for him to spend his life in such a way as to negative Honen's words. Very true, said Zensho, and hurried away, so that Ryukwin could hardly bid him goodbye. 7. Zenshobo's open propaganda. As Ryukin's disciples saw Zenshobo off, they asked him for some message they could carry as a memento of their accidental meeting, and after a few moments of silence, he turned round and said, always diligently say the Nembutsu, and when death comes make your Ojo secure. Thereafter people of with great reverence, and he could not go on with his work as a carpenter, so he gave himself up to an extensive propaganda of the Nembutsu. He once said the main point in the study of the Jodo doctrine is to come to believe it is easy to attain Ojo in the land of perfect bliss. If you will only think it easy you will find it so. But the reason modern scholars disagree so often is because the sacred teachings are so profound, that it is hard to distinguish a false from a true interpretation of them, whereas we find nothing of this kind in Honen's teaching. Zenshobo once asked a man, how sure are you of your Ojo? I am about as sure of it, he said, as I am that I can strike my left that with my right every time without missing. That would be very uncertain, said Zenshobo, and when the man said, what is the right way to think about it? Zenshobo replied, you ought to think it as sure as that the living die, for in trying to strike one fist against the other, there is always a chance of missing. 8. Zenshobo's Ojo. So from his 29th year he practiced nothing but the Nembutsu, and continued it up to his 85th year, when he was taken ill in the 9th month of the 2nd year of Shoka, 1258. 5 or 6 days before his death, he met Honen in a dream, and on the 3rd of the 10th month, at the hour of the dog, 8 p.m., he saw some lotus flowers coming down to him, when he said, "Look at them." Later he remarked, "I have just been formally welcomed by the Buddha." Then again, at the beginning of the hour of the tiger, 4 a.m., the following day he said, "Kwanin and Seishi have already come down from paradise to welcome me." And rising to a sitting posture, he folded his hands, repeated the Nembutsu 3 times in a loud voice, and expired. This was at the hour of the tiger, 4 a.m., on the 4th day of the 10th month, in the 2nd year of Shoka, 1258. 9. Chogen, who rebuilt the Tadaiji temple at Nara. Zenshobo Chogen, a priest in the upper part of the village of Daigo, was a man deeply versed in the Shingon doctrines, but being brought under the influence of Honen's virtuous character, he began to pray for Ojo, and pledged himself to become one of his disciples. One time when Honen was holding a discussion at Ohara, with Bishop Kenshin of the Tendai, Chogen was there with over 30 disciples. Now the Tadaiji temple at Nara had been burned down during the evil war between the Taira and Minamoto clans, in the 4th year of Iyo, 1180, and Chogen was appointed chief commissioner for the raising of funds for the reconstruction of the temple. As he was about to commence building operations, and wanted to test the skill of the carpenters, he called one to him, and asked him if he were building a house, how he would put the laths under the rafters of the roof. He replied he had never seen a house built that way. "Well, I have an idea about this, and want you to build for me just as I say. It would never do to build it like that. I should only be laughed at by everyone in my trade," he replied. Chogen made the same request of many others, who all declined in the same way, till at last one man said he understood. Thereupon Chogen asked him if he had ever built such a house before. "No, I never did, but if you tell me how, I will try to do it as you say." At this, the commissioner said, "I have no idea of making it that way. I only said this to find out what sort of man you are," and he gave the contract for the reconstruction to him. He was thus very shrewd in all the plans he made, and earned the nickname of Shitaka Daiichi Shunjobo, that is the Shunjobo, who is second to none in planning. The emperor was pleased to contribute toward the construction funds all that was due the imperial household from the 2 provinces of Baizen and Suwo, and on the completion of the work, lasting over 10 years, the dedication ceremony was held on the 12th of the 3rd month, in the 6th year of Kenkyu. 1195, His Majesty, Gotoba, favoring the occasion with his presence. The shogun, Yoritamo, also came up from Kamakura to the capital that he too might further promote his affinity with the Buddha. Crowds flocked in from the city and country roundabout, and the ceremony was conducted with great solemnity and magnificence. The 2-roofed temple building, in which the great image of Buddha was placed, had a frontage of 290 feet and depth of 170, and the bronze image of Vairocana itself, 54 feet high, was erected at the same time and beautifully polished. Surely this was a piece of work quite beyond the level of ordinary technical skill. In the 11th month of the 3rd year of Kenin AD 1203, when the second dedication ceremony was held, the emperor read a dedicatory prayer, written by Chikatsun Rakaku, a state advisor of middle rank, when he was a state counselor, in which it is stated that Shunjobo was no ordinary man. 10. This Chogen, through his master Honen's teaching and example, because a man of such abounding faith in the Nembutsu, that he inaugurated a service for its repetition at his old residence in the compound of the Daigo temple, where he used to be, and made it fixed custom for posterity. He also organized services for the continuous repetition of the Nembutsu in 7 places, 2 of which were the Nembutsudo in this compound of the Tadaiji temple in Nara, and Shimbesho on Mount Koya. It is said that the practice is continuous without interruption right down to our day. The story goes that this priest, when he was young, was once carried off by a long-nosed goblin to a distant place, and while there, another goblin told him that his youth was destined to do some great work for the world, and should at once be released. He accepted the warning and released him. Strangely enough, these words actually came true. He finally passed away in the Tadaiji temple on the 6th Of the 6th month in the 6th year of Kenkyu, 1135.